Hello guys, welcome to Code DIY. So you're welcome back to the FastAPI series. And in this series, or this part of the video, we're going to be covering how to deploy your FastAPI application to Amazon ECS via a Docker container. So I understand that I've not kind of like released a video in about a month on this series. So I would like to give an apology to everyone out there that kind of expected a video the following week. So I was kind of like pressed to work and a couple of other things that I needed to attend to. So I could not necessarily create time to make a video, but I'm here now and I'm going to be working on completing the series as soon as possible. So let's get started. So if you're just joining us, just a quick recap of what we did. In our last video, we kind of like created routes for our post. So um, just here we have a post folder and we have a routes.py that kind of addresses everything that has to do with having to create a post. So um, this was kind of what we did in our last video. So I want to make this video very independent in a way that if you're new or if you're just trying to learn how to deploy, you can still kind of watch this video separately. So if that's your aim, you can still kind of like follow along and tag along. And I believe this video is going to be a comprehensive guide on how to deploy your applications. So now to deploy our applications, I'm going to be making a couple of changes to my app. So if we recall, we have a .env file that kind of contains all our environmental variables and basically our connection details to our database. We also have our app.py, which is kind of like our main FastAPI application where our application is initialized and run. We have our config.py where our settings are kind of created with Python sync. We also then have our database.py where our database connection details are kind of like present. And we also have our dependencies.py. Let me see, it's my screen, app.py. I think this this is too big. Let me go back to my post. Sorry. Routes.py. Okay. I think having things this way is kind of like a lot. It's too big, so I'm just gonna just reduce this back. Yes, so this is kind of like comfortable, or no, let's keep it this way. I think things are more visible this way. So that's okay. So I'm going to be showing you how to deploy your application. So let's get started. So first, when we're trying to deploy our application to a production environment, one common practice is to have different settings for the development environment and the production. Sorry, for the development environment and the production environment. So that's what I'm going to be doing first. So first, I have a .env file for development. So I'm going to create a new .env file called .env.prod, which is going to contain my env files for my production. And then I'm going to need to copy the details here and paste it here. So what I'm going to do is later on in this video, I'm going to update my database name, my database username, my database password, and possibly my secret key with my production credentials. So to get this database name and username password, I'm going to have to create that with Amazon RDS, so Amazon Relational Database System. Now, as you can see, we kind of have two environmental variables here, which is .env and .env.prod, .env and .env.prod. Now, we need to be able to specify which one is to be used depending on our application's environment. So I'm going to go to my app.py here. So I want to tell app.py to kind of be able to discern what to kind of be able to discern what settings to be used or what env file to be used based on my application environment. So I'm going to import OS. So I'm going to have an I would say an external environmental variable called app.env. So just like we have our environment here called secret key, I'm going to have an environmental variable in my general OS environment called RPMV. This RPMV is going to tell us whether my application is in development or production. So let's kind of write a function called def get app env. Basically, it says get app environment. So what that is going to do is going to have app underscore env is going to be equals to os dot get env, right? And it's going to get a particular key here. So the name of the key is going to be fetching is going to be app env. So that will be app underscore env. So we're also going to need to have dev here. So now that I kind of have RPMV and dev is going to be the default. So in a situation where RPMV has not been set, we're going to be using dev. Then I would also then need to go to here. I'm going to say if app underscore env is equals to prod. So return my env file as that will be .env.prod. Otherwise, I would say else return .env. So what this is kind of doing is if we have our RPNV defined as prod, basically telling us we're in the production environment, we're going to be using this env.prod here, this env.prod environment here. Otherwise, in a situation where we kind of like have it's not set or my RPMV basically specified to dev or something else, I'm going to be using this .env here. So now I need to then specify this function to be called here, which is going to set our env file. Now, to kind of set our env file, I know you would kind of expect me to go get underscore rpmv and make a call here. This is actually fine, but there's been some recent changes to Pydantic. I think in my requirements file, I'm using Pydantic 2. So you don't need to use the config class anymore. You would need to use what I call the config dict. So I'm going to say settings, config dict. Yes, config dict. So I'm going to import that here. Then I can then use the config dict to specify my env file. So I'm going to say model underscore config is going to be equals to settings config date here, and settings config date basically takes an argument, I think a positional parameter of env underscore file. Yes, and then I'm going to pass in get underscore app underscore env. So this itself is going to help us to it's going to help us specify the environment file to be used, whether we're to use .env or we're going to be using .env.prod. So that is kind of something that we're going to need to take note of. Also, I would also need to update every other file that kind of uses env. So another file that kind of uses env will be in my Alembic, where I kind of have my env.py. So if you're not using Alembic, it's fine. You can basically skip this part of the video, this section that has to do with configuring my application for Alembic. But since we're using Alembic for our migrations, we're going to need to set Alembic. So in our case, I'm kind of doing from decouple import config as env config. The decouple basically recognizes my .env file here, but now I kind of have two env files. So I'm going to be changing my approach to things now. So I'm going to say from decouple, I'm going to import config, right? And I'm going to import repository env. So now, as you can see, I have an error that says, okay, you basically called env config here. It's not defined. So to kind of do that, I'm going to need to probably, I would say I'm going to need to define my env config. So I'm going to say env config is going to be equals to config, right? And my repository env here, which I've already imported. Then it's going to be taking a source, which is going to be the part of my env file. So it's going to be a string, and I'm going to pass in .env to this. So once I'm done passing .env to this, I'm then going to go over to the next line, and I'm going to say app underscore env is equals to os. Basically what I'm doing here in my config.py, where I'm trying to get this, that's what I'm doing. So I can just decide to copy this and paste this here and say app underscore env, sorry, equals to os.get env. So I'm getting an error here that said os is not defined, so I'll need to import os. Good. So now I kind of like want to make a decision, and that is I want to change my env config to use either the development or the production environment. So right now env config is using .env, which is the default env file for our development environment. So I can then say something like if app underscore env equals prod, then I would need to basically specify my env path. So now I know that you might expect me to do something like env config equals config, right, repository env, and I'm going to then pass in .env.prod. So based on my experience in building stuff, so it's very possible that the couple might not normally you might need to first load the env here and pass it to this. That is, you're going to say something like load, basically something that says from, let me see, so you need to load the environment from .env. So you can basically say from .env import load env or load.env. So you need to load this env.prod, but at times .env might not necessarily get this file in your parents directory. So at times you might need to just decide, in cases where you're having problems with your directory and you're working with a complicated directory, you might need to find the env. So that'll be I could say find.env. So in my situation, I'm going to say env path is going to be equals to find.env then .env.prod. So what this is going to do is it's going to look for my env.prod, and once it's seen my env.prod, I'm going to need to then pass in my env underscore path. Now there's one interesting thing about having to use find.env. There's a positional argument here that says res error if not found. I'm going to be setting that to, I'm going to be leaving that as false by default. So in case you want to kind of like throw an error, in case your env.prod is not found, you can then do something like raise error if not found. You can set it true, but I'm not going to be, I don't want to raise an error because this is here. I expect this to work, so I'm going to leave this as this. So with this, we've made our we've basically made our Alembic environmental variables up to date based on environmental variables. So if we're in development environment, we're going to be using our .env, and if we're in production, we're going to be using .env.prod. So that's been settled. Now the next thing we kind of need to do then is we need to Dockerize our application. So first, I know you're going to be expecting me to just create a Docker file, build it, and then push. Now I want to give you an holistic approach to how to go about this. So I want to give you an holistic approach in a sense that we're going to be then switching. Normally, I could run my application with Python app.py and stuff like that, but I want to switch to an holistic view, and I kind of want to use Docker in my development environment, and I also want to be using Docker in my production environment. So now I'm going to go to dockercompose.yml. So in my dockercompose.yml, I'm then going to be doing something like adding a new service under this service key. I'm going to be adding a new service under this service key, which is going to be my FastAPI application. So what the essence of this new service will do is it's going to be my FastAPI application, and it's going to help me to run my FastAPI application inside this container. So Now, to get started, I'm going to create a new service. I'll call the service app. And my service, I'll then specify a build. So now, what this build is doing is basically saying, it says the context used for building the image. So when they say the context kind of basically means the Docker file you're going to be using to build the image. So I'm going to be specifying dots, which is my root directory. So I'm yet to kind of create a Docker file, which I'm going to be doing very soon. So I've used dots, so I'm basically saying that you're going to check my parent directory. My Docker Compose is basically in my parent directory. So the Docker file you're going to be using, that's what you're going to be using to build my container. So build dot is a way you can go about this. In some situations where you're kind of like, you have your Docker file in a path, so you can do something like path /files/Docker file. That's in a situation where you kind of have a folder called files with your Docker file inside. But my Docker file is going to be my parent directory. So I can just specify this with dot here, which is very much fine. I'm going to specify my image. So this image is going to be the name of my image. So the name of my application is, I think I've been calling this Fast Blogger all along. So I can call this the Fast Blogger. So I can call this Fast Blogger, which is going to be the name of my image. And it's going to also ask me for my container name. I can specify that to be Fast. Sorry, did I just say Fast? I said, sorry, that'll be Fast Blogger. Yes, so Fast Blogger is going to work. It sounds more like a tongue twister. So I'm going to say ports. And now I want to specify the port my application is going to be running. So I'm going to go back to app.py. Since my application has been running on the port 8080 all this while, so I'm going to go back to my Docker Compose of file, Docker Compose of YAML, and I'm going to say ports. I'm going to say 8080 8080. So that is a way of kind of like specifying my port. Now there's something I kind of want to do. I'm going to add an extra key that says depends. So depends on, so it's gonna, I'm going to need to specify the name of the service, and the name of the service I'm going to be specifying is Postgres. So my application requires Postgres to start. So when I say depends on, this application is only going to be built if a service called Postgres exists. So it's very essential for me to have Postgres here. So I'm going to say depends on Postgres. So in other situations where you kind of have things like Redis, you can add a service called Redis under here. And if your application desperately needs Redis real time, you can just decide to add Redis under depends on. So that's that. Then I want to kind of have to retain the state of my application. So I'm going to specify volumes, and I'm going to say app_data to be app_data. So that will be the part where my files are kind of like stored. So app_data, app_data. So this is basically me. I'm trying to define a name volume for my app. So also, I'm also going to do something here. I'm going to define a volume for my database. So I'm going to say my volume is going to be Postgres_data. That's what I'm going to call the name of my volume. And it's going to be under var_lib_PostgreSQL, right? And /data. So that way I do not lose basically rights to my database. So basically when I kind of like create something or user data in my database, the data is kind of persisted in my container. That's the essence of having these volumes here. So I'm just going to need to declare my volumes here. So I can declare my volumes, and the name of the first volume is app_data. So I can just put this here, or I can just say Postgres_data. So I think this is fine. So great. So with this, we can then try to create our Docker file now. So let me just go back here, and yeah. So now I'm going to create a Docker file here. Okay. So let's get started. So I will need to create my Docker file. So now, if you're familiar with Docker files, I would need to like put in some commands. So now I'm thinking of not having to write the command. Normally, I kind of wanted to paste the command myself, but let's just write it anyway. So I'm going to say from base image. So I love this. So I'm going to say from Python. Let me see. Oh, it's kind of like giving me some suggestions. That's fine. So you know what? I want to use from Python 3.10. I run 3.10 on my local system. 3.10 I've been slim. So I'm using this because it's kind of like a reduced version of Python. If you're using Alpine, that's fine. You can use Alpine if you want. You can basically use whatever you want. So I'm going to say from Python, which is going to be the base image I'm going to be specifying. And the next thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to need to set my environmental variable. So I'm going to say set environmental variables. Then I'm going to then say env Python. I could say Python don't. Okay, this one's I don't need to explain these ones, but these ones are just personal preferences. So I'm going to say Python don't write. I think that's Python don't write bytecode 1. Then I'll need to specify another env called Python buffered, basically because I kind of want I want my logs to be displayed in my container to be 1. So I guess that's clear. Why is this covered in white? I find it quite weird that this is covered in white. So next, I'm going to need to specify an extra env called env my app underscore env. So like I said before, I'm gonna have like an OS level environmental variable called app-env. This app-env is going to specify if my application is in dev or in production. Sorry. Good. So I'll need to save this because of good. So this export app-env here, I'll then need to export my app-env to, sorry, I'm going to need to set my env to prod, or maybe I could set it to dev. Now, I'm sure there might be questions coming up from people that are more experienced. Like, okay, why are you using prod or dev here? Can you just like kind of like have different files for production and development? That is actually true. It's fine. You can decide to have different Docker files for production and for development. But just for simplicity, I don't really want to have to overcomplicate things here. I'm trying to avoid maybe having a multi-container environment where I kind of have different Docker files for Postgres, Docker files for my basically a different Docker file for my web service. So I'm just going to have a single Docker file for everything. So in cases I need to push, I'll just swap this. But don't be surprised if you kind of like get into situations where you kind of find different Docker files for production. Sorry, don't be surprised if you kind of find different Docker files for production or development in some repositories. I mean, it's kind of like the thing that is usually being done in the industry. So let's move forward. So I'm also going to need to then do something like create work dir, or let me say create the working directory. I guess that's a more comprehensive comment. So I'm going to say work dir. So the work dir part is going to be I can call this app. Sorry. Then I'll need to copy all of my files to app. Now, so what this is going to do is this is going to copy everything in my current directory to app. So in the process of having to copy this to app, it's very possible that my virtual environment folder can be copied to ./app. So I'm going to create a new file called docker. Should that be docker? Sorry, docker ignore, or rather .docker ignore. Yeah, .docker ignore. So I'm going to need to then specify then, yeah. So this kind of like ensures that my virtual environment folder is not copied to my it's not kind of copied to my Docker container. So then I'll then need to go back to my Docker file. So the next thing I need to do is I'll need to install the required packages. So I'll say install required packages. So to do that, I need to do something like run pip. So I'm going to say run. It's a command, pip install no cache dir. Then I'll say specify r, and there'll be /app. We need to recall that all of our project files have been copied into the app directory. So I'm going to say app /requirements.txt. Then I'm going to say export a particular port. That will be export. Did I just say export? Sorry, expose port 8080, and then I'll need to then specify a command. I think everyone is kind of familiar with us. A CMD rather command, which is going to specify where the commands basically I'm going to be using to start my application. So normally it's expected that I kind of start with Python app.py, but I'm not going to be doing that. So now I'm going to comment this also. I'm going to say expose the ports on which our application will run. Good. Now, if you realize I do not have a requirements.txt file here, so I'm going to do that by saying pip phrase, right? Pip phrase requirements.txt. So this is going to create my requirements file and everything I need. So now I know you kind of expect that I kind of put in my commands here, Python app.py, but let's realize something now. If you're in a production environment, you kind of need to do some things first before starting your application. And one of the things you kind of need to do is to run migrations. So before your application starts, you might need to run a couple of commands. So if you just specify CMD here, you might not be able to do that. So what I will kind of recommend is, at times you can kind of like go to your Docker Compose file here. There's something called a command. So you can basically specify the command here, but I'm not going to be specifying the command. Rather, I'm going to be creating a bash file. So I'm going to call this bash file entry.point.sh. So entry.point.sh is going to contain is basically a bash file that's going to contain my commands that will be run before my application starts and the command to start my application. So to declare a bash file, I think that will be #bin/sh. I think that's correct. So the first command I'll need to run is alembic upgrade add. Next, I'm going to say Python I would say app.py. So app.py, but we need to also take note of something that our work directory is /app. So I'm going to need to say Python /app/app.py. So I think this kind of like works well. So I'm going to save this here. Then I'm going to then go back to my Docker file and I'm going to say entry point is going to be equals to my app /entry points, right, .sh. So this is going to run this. Now, one major problem could be that it's possible my container is not going to run this because this file does not necessarily have executable permissions. So I can do something like run chmod +x, give it an executable permission. So this is gonna, oh, did I just say _x? That'll be +x. So this is going to give it an executable permission. So this kind of then runs my application. So with this, I believe we're kind of like good to go. We're kind of ready to get started, and we kind of then are able to run our application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Docker Compose.yaml, then build my application. Okay, you know what? I'm not going to build my application now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some corrections, and here are the corrections. So normally I could decide to build my applications, but we're going to run into an error. And I really want us to kind of run into this error, but at the same time, I don't really want to waste our time. But I mean, we're here to learn, so let's just run into the error anyways. So we're just we're gonna run into an error now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say clear. Then I'll need to build my application with Docker Compose. So I'll say Docker Compose. I will say F. I'll need to specify my file. Okay, since I have a Docker Compose or YML file here, I can use this, but I'm going to rename this to local.yaml. Since this Docker Compose file is one of what I'm going to be using for development. So I'm going to say local.yaml and build. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait for this to build. So instead of us waiting all this while for this to build, I'm instead going to just pause the video. All right, guys, so we did run into an error while trying to build this. And one of the errors we kind of ran into was it said pgconfig executable not found. It basically, we could not build this because we had problems with Postgres. So one thing you can kind of like do is, so it says, basically, if you run into an error like this that says, there is an issue mentioned with the package above. The error generates from a soft process. It's not likely a problem with PIP. Basically, a problem that has to do with Postgres. One thing you can do is follow this instruction. It said, if you prefer to avoid building scopeg2 from source, PIP, please install via the scopeg2 binary. So if I go to my requirements of TSD file, you can see that I have this here. So I can replace this with binary. I'm not sure if there is a scopeg2 version that kind of has binary in it, but I'm going to try my luck and go back and say docker build. Then this is going to run again, and then we can say we're resuming from where we stopped. All right, guys, so it seems our container is done building. So one interesting thing I kind of noticed is I ran the command with docker -compose, which was basically a mistake. So this is supposed to run with a space. So I'm going to say docker compose build. So this is going to rebuild this, but yes, we're going to notice something kind of different with the way this is building. Yes, if you see this, that means you're building with compose. But in a situation where you kind of find yourself having to go through something like this, where you kind of have it building from step 1 to step 10, you might not necessarily be using compose in that aspect. So this is how we kind of then go with compose. Please take note, we do docker compose -f, which specifies the file, local.yam, then build. Okay, guys, good news. It seems that our container is done building. So the next thing I'm going to then do is run docker compose f local.yml or YAML run. So now in this situation, we're going to run into an error, which I'm going to explain. So let's just run this anyways. Okay, it says docker compose f local.yml. Sorry, did I just say run? Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. So this is, as you can see, this is kind of like then creating everything we need. So creating container fast plug underscore postgres underscore data. It's also trying to create blogger and other files we kind of like need. So now if I go back, you can kind of see that I ran into an error. It says operational error, connection to server at localhost 127.0.0.8000 field, connection refused. So what this basically means is that my connection to my database was refused and I could not connect to my database. So now where's the problem from? One of the things is that one of the things you kind of need to understand is that when we're inside the Docker container, if we specify a connection to a local host and our application is running in the Docker container, it's not going to connect. This kind of has to do with things that are related to networking. So there's a way to kind of fix this, which is what I'm basically going to go through with you. Now, one way to fix this is this. First, I'm going to need to go to my Postgres. Here's my Postgres, here's the container name, and here's how it's running. So the first thing I'll need to do is I'll need to specify my ports. I'm not going to be using port 8000 anymore. I'm going to be using port 5432. Now, the port you're going to be using is kind of up to you. You necessarily do not need to change the port values. So I'm just changing the port from 8000 back to 5432 because it's the default Postgres port. I was using 8000 before because there was a process basically running on 5432 and I didn't want to stop that process. So now the process is no longer running, so I would just prefer to run this on my 5432 port. Now, one thing we kind of need to go to now is our .env file for dev. If you recall, we did not specify a db_host. Rather, we specified localhost 8000, which was basically the port our container was running on. So normally we would then need to do something like 5432 because I've kind of gone to my local.yaml file and I've specified this to 5432. But let me make things kind of interesting for you. That's not going to work because, like I said before, your Docker container is not going to be able to connect to your local host when basically running on your machine. You need to connect to the service instead. So how do you connect to the service? This is what I'm going to be talking about next. So first, what we're going to be doing next is we're going to be going to our .env. We're going to be adding an extra environmental variable called db_host. And db_host is going to be equals to, I know you would expect me to write localhost. So db_host is going to be equals to Postgres, not localhost. And why am I using Postgres? db_host is basically pointing to POSTGRES, this Postgres service here. So this Postgres service is basically what's going to be used for my Docker application. So this Postgres service is what's going to be used for my Docker application. So I'm going to go back to my .env, and since I have this here, I'll go further by updating my application. Now, I'm going to go to my database.py. So rather than having my database.py to be using localhost, it's going to be using settings.db_host. Now this is, I see this is kind of showing red, and the reason why this is showing red is because we've not defined this in our PyDancing config. So I can define this in my PyDancing config by saying db_host is going to be str, which is going to be a string. So I'm going to save this. Sorry. I want to stop my container now. So I'm going to say app.py, config.py. So it seems I've kind of updated my db_host. Going back to my database.py, same thing. So as you can see, we've basically specified settings.db_host to be equals to my env's Postgres, which is kind of pointing to this Postgres service here. So if you were to name this to be db_Postgres here, what you then need to specify here would be db_Postgres. So I hope that's kind of clear for everyone. So I'm going to just go back and, I'm going to go back to my local.yaml and specify this to be Postgres again. Now that I have this, let's kind of move further and build our application again. So I'm going to say docker.local.yaml build. So once I'm done building, I kind of have more certainty that my application is going to be running this time around. So let's just wait for the requirements to be installed. Then we're going to then run the application. Okay, now our container is done building. Now the next thing we're going to need to do is we're going to run this. So now that we kind of run this, we're still gonna kind of run into a problem again. So I'm sure, sorry, Docker Compose up. So I know this might kind of like be inconvenient for some of you that, okay, why are we kind of running into problems? The point of running into problems is for you to kind of like understand what's happening. So I could basically just like walk my way around this and basically do things in a way that you do not see any problems while I'm kind of like creating this video. But in case you're kind of like working on this video, it's very possible you might run into problems that you're unable to fix. So I'm going over all the problems you might be facing so you don't have to run into such problems at any point in time. So as you can see, we have a situation that says operational error, connection refused. So why is the connection still getting refused? Especially when we kind of specified a new kind of host here. Now, the reason why our connection is getting refused is because of this. If we go to our entry point.sh app, we need to recall that our application is starting, but our application is also making a migration via Alembic. So I forgot to update the Alembic env.py file, and this is basically on purpose. So if you go back to the alembic.inr file, as you can see, I have my localhost 8000, which is basically what Alembic is still trying to connect to, because if we go back here, let's take a look at the error message one more time. What's that? Yes, as you can see, Alembic is still trying to connect to localhost port 8000, which is kind of like a big problem. So that's what Alembic is trying to do. Now, as you can see, I need to update this sqlalchemy.url here, but I'm going to be doing something interesting now. I'm going to be taking this out, and I'm not going to be using my alembic.ini file anymore to specify my sqlalchemy.url. Rather, I'll be specifying this here. So to specify this here, one way to go about this is I'll need to set my sqlalchemy URL here, because if we look at it here, my config.get main options is trying to get the sqlalchemy URL from my alembic.inr file, but now that I've kind of removed it, it's not going to find it there. So to make things easier, I'm just going to go here and I'm going to say config, which is basically my Alembic configuration that's been defined here by saying context.config, and context is being import from Alembic. So if I go here, I'm going to say config dot set main option. Then I'll need to specify the name of the option I need to set, which will be sqlalchemy.url. Then I'll need to specify the value. So I'll need to specify the value of this, and the value of this is going to be db_url. So what is db_url? It's not defined. So it's a good way to go about this is I can then say db_url is going to be equals to I'm gonna go to my database.py here. I'm gonna copy this here. Good. So I'm gonna paste this here. It's gonna be equals to PostgreSQL settings.db_username this. Now, if you recall, we are not using we're not necessarily using Pydantic configurations here. So I'll need to pass this to my DB URL using env-config. So I can then come here. I'm just gonna copy this here. I guess I could copy this here and copy this here, and I think this is supposed to be my DB underscore password. Then I could also take this and copy this here, and this is supposed to be DB underscore host. Then I would need to say settings here. That would be if I recall, this should be DB underscore name. So with this, I kind of have my DB URL set. So it seems that I'm having a problem here, and that's because my f string is using single quotes. So I'm going to change this to double quotes. So perfect. As you can see, I then have my DB underscore URL here. So by the time Alembic is trying to run my migrations offline at this intersection here, it's basically going to find my db underscore URL I defined here and use this. But in situations where we're trying to run migrations online, as you can see, it's Alembic is basically trying to get this configuration fresh for my config.ini section here. So I might need to just edit this separately. So I can take this, I'm going to take this out and bring it out here. I'm going to say config, sorry, I guess that's inside the documentation comment. I'm going to say config underscore section. I think I basically got this from GitHub, and I'm going to paste this here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add an extra field, because this is basically returning a dictionary of strings for me. So I'm going to include what I call the SQL Alchemy URL here. So it's what I'm going to include, and I'm going to bring it here. The SQL URL Alchemy, it's going to be equals to my db underscore URL. Sorry, this should be config underscore section. So it's going to be returning the db underscore URL. It's going to be equals to the db underscore URL. Then I would then need to pass in my config underscore section here, and then save this. And once we have this, we're good to go. So with this settings that we have here, I do not think we should have any more errors in our applications. So if we have any more errors, I guess that must have been a mistake or an oversight. So since I've stopped this, I can kind of then, I can probably just rebuild and then probably run my application again. Okay, so my container is done building. I'm going to run this, and I'm going to run this with Docker compose local up. Then our application can be up. Okay, okay. Database system is ready to accept connections. Then, good. So as you can see, this is from Alembic. It says alembic.runtime migrations context.info, blah, 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 blah. And as you can see, our migrations called change DB models has been run. So this means that this command here called alembic upgrade ed was successfully run. Then the command to start my application was then run. So if I decide to go back to my web browser here, and I decide to go to localhost, I think my application is running on port 8080/docs. Yes, you can see that my application is basically started. So I can decide to just try things out. If a user is being created, I can call this user string 5673, or I can call this user string at me.com and give it a password of blah, 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 and execute this. And as you can see, user has been created. So this kind of shows evidence that our application has successfully connected to our database and receiving requests. In case you kind of, when you're trying to create a user, in case you kind of like run into a internal server error, that means that you kind of like have a problem here. So that has been done. So as you can see, we just successfully Dockerized our application locally. So I know this was kind of a lot of stress, which is kind of the reasons we kind of have templates, cookie cutter templates, to kind of help setting up our application easily. So let's move forward. Now, the next thing we're going to be doing is we're then going to be deploying our application full-time to ECS. Now, to deploy my application, I'm going to then move, since my application is kind of like working in my local environment right now, it's kind of clear that this application is good to go. So I'm going to say production.yaml. So I'm going to have my production.yaml. So, and then I'm going to copy my production.yaml. Sorry, I'm going to copy my local.yaml and paste it into my production.yaml. Good. Now that I've done this, I'm going to be taking out the Postgres part of the application, and this is not going to depend on Postgres. Then I'm going to also need to take out the Postgres underscore data, the volume aspect, and I'm also going to need to go back here. Perfect. Now, the reason I'm kind of like taking out Postgres is because we are not, I repeat, we're not going to be pushing into production. We're not basically going to be putting it, we're not going to be pushing into production a database that's going to be running our container. So that's not standard practice. Our database is going to be running in production in something like RDS. Your database might be hosted on DigitalOcean, Google Cloud Platform, Azure, whatever you feel like using, you can use for this tutorial. But for my choice, I'm going to be using ECS. So now that I kind of have this, I can just kind of go ahead and build my application, and we're good to go. But there's one last change I need to make, which is this. As you can see, I have my .env.prod here, but it's kind of using my credentials from here. So I need to replace this with production credentials. And to do that, I'm going to need to go here and go to RDS. I'm going to need to create an RDS database. So I'm going to create a database here, and there's an option that says standard create. So I'm going to be using standard create. I'm going to be using Aurora. Sorry, no, I'm not going to be using Aurora. I'm going to be using PostgreSQL, default PostgreSQL. ECS is going to allow me to specify my engine version. So I think I'd go with I think PostgreSQL, yeah, 14.4 R1. You can basically go with any version you want. So okay, this is not, let me see, I think 14.6 R1. Yes, so since this is a tutorial, it's fine. You can use the free tier version. So I won't necessarily recommend you using production. So you can decide to use production if you're actually building an application from your for your organization or your enterprise. So, but this is a tutorial. We're going to just use free tier for production because we do not need anything much of performance. We just want to show that something works. So here I'm going to have free tier. My database instance identifier, I'm going to allow my database instance identifier to be FastDB. My credentials, so my master username is going to be Postgres to log in for your master database instance. Sorry, I think, what was this? This is Postgres. That's the name of my username. So I'm going to go back here and replace this with Postgres. So then master password is going to be at least 8 printable characters. So my password is going to be admin 1234 and admin 1234. So I'm going to go back here and replace my password with admin 1234. So then, in case you want to manage this in AWS Secrets Manager, you can, but we're not talking about AWS Secrets now. So then I'm going to have this to be here. Okay. So since we have this set, we can then move on. Under my instance configuration, you don't need to modify this. Also for my connectivity, don't connect to an EC2 compute resource. I don't want to set up an EC2 compute resource for my application. So it says virtual private cloud. You don't need to modify this. You can use the default one unless you want to create your own VPC for your database. So public access, yes, I want to give public access to my database because I may want to connect my database to PG admin. I'm going to be connecting my database to my application. So I'm going to give you public access. So security groups, there's a default security group. I'm not going to be using the default. I have a security group called DBSG, which is my database security group. So just to give you a more clear explanation of what that security group does. So I'm going to go to EC2. Okay, so for people that are kind of watching this that are new, a security group are just set of rules and guidelines that specify how connections should come into your database and how connections should go out of your database. So you want to specify who can connect to your database or who cannot connect, or what or who can your database send connections to. So if I go here, you can see I have a bunch of security groups here. As you can see, this is my database security group. So as you can see, I have what I call an inbound rule here, and that is what you need to specify. The inbound rule is called PostgreSQL, and it basically allows from anywhere, basically anyone to connect to my database. So in some situations, you can specify the IP address you want, whatever you want to specify, you can specify. But this is kind of just how my inbound rules work. So then since I kind of have this here, I'm also going to work with my DBSG. My availability zones, I don't need to specify availability zones, and I don't need to specify an RDS proxy. For authentication, you can use password authentication, which is what we're going to be using. So performance, you can decide to use performance in case you want to monitor your performance with AWS CloudWatch. So there are also additional configurations. So additional configurations contain what we call initial database name. This will be the initial database that will be created when my RDS database instance gets created. So I want my it to use this my DB name called fast blogger. So I'm just gonna copy this and paste this here. Then since this is done, I'm going to leave this. I'm also going to enable automated backups. I necessarily do not need to do this, but you can specify to have a backup daily. You can decide to choose a window for yourself, but I don't have any preference. There are also snapshots. Okay, snapshots and replication are basically AWS stuff. So maybe I might create a video on that later. Basically a video that focuses on things that have to do with scaling and optimizing your systems, but we just want to deploy an application now. So let's create our database. So this is going to create our database. So creating our database might take a little bit of time since we're working with AWS. So I'm just going to pause the video, and once this is done, I'll then resume creation of my data. I'll then resume how to connect to our database. All right, guys, we're back and our database has been created. So as you can see, it's basically configuring enhanced monitoring now. And since monitoring is just being created, we can still work with our database. So there's something that says consider creating a blue-green deployment. We're not doing anything related to deployments, but in case you kind of want to know what blue-green deployment is, I have a video showing you how to deploy your Django application with no downtime with blue-green deployment. So you can decide to basically check that out. So let's move forward. So I'm going to go here to my FastDB. And here, as you can see, I have my credentials here. This is the endpoints to connect to my database. This is the ports. And basically, you can see it's publicly accessible. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this endpoint. This endpoint is going to be my database host. So I'm going to go here, DB_host. Okay, let's just put it underscore here. DB_host is going to be equals to this, which is my endpoint. So I'm going to put the port at the back, which is going to be 5432. Sorry, 5432. Yeah, so 5432. So I'm going to save that. Yeah, I think we kind of have all the credentials written out. Sorry about that. So 5432. Then yes, we're good. Now let's kind of do something interesting. We kind of want to be sure that we can connect to our database. So I'm going to go to pgadmin. I'm going to create a new server here. That's going to be that's basically going to be prod. So I can call this my prod server. Then I'll need to go into my connection. So I'll need to specify my host, which is what we have here. The maintenance database name is Postgres. The username is Postgres. The password is admin1234. I'm going to save password, and then I'm going to save this. So if this eventually connects, that means our database is working and it's giving us access. Oh, perfect. It's working. So if I go here, as you can see, I have my prod server. And if I go here, yes, as you can see, we already have Fast Blogger created. We have our Postgres maintenance database, and we have RDS admin. So this kind of like tells us that we can connect to our database. Now, so if we're to connect to our database, this is going to be working now. So to connect to this database, we can then go to our Docker file here and then say switch to prod, RPNB is going to be prod. So let's remember that in some situations, to make things easier, we can just have a different Docker files for local and production. But just to kind of like make things easier for everyone, just to make things simpler, I'm just specifying it here. So now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be building my Docker application here for production. So as you can see, I kind of have everything running on 8080 and stuff. So I'm going to go back to this command here. So I'm going to say production.yaml. So you can decide to generate a new secret key, but I'm not necessarily, I don't need to do that right now. So I'm going to just go back and say create a build for production.yaml. So while that is being created, I'm going to go back here. Sorry. So while that is being created, I'm going to go back here to RDS. Okay. So I need to deploy my FastAPI application to ECS, which is Elastic Container Service. So the first thing I need to do is I'm going to go to ECR, which is basically Elastic Container Registry. So Elastic Container Registry is going to allow me to upload my Docker image here, and uploading my Docker image here is going to then help me to be able to specify my Docker image when trying to create my ECS service. So the first thing I need to do is I need to create a repository and specify the name of that repository. So if I go back here to my VS Code, as you can see, my container is being built. The name of my container is Fast Blogger. So I'm going to go to here. I'm going to specify Fast Blogger. So it says repository name is required. I just specified it. So now that I've kind of like done this, I can then say, I can then create my repository. So this is going to create a repository. It doesn't take a long time to do this. So I'm going to say Fast Blogger. Then I can do something called view push commands. So these are the commands I need to kind of push to ECR. So the first thing I need to do is I need to copy the first command and go back to VS Code. So as you can see, my my container is done building with compose. So I'm going to just paste this here, and this is going to log in with ECR. Now, after logging in with ECR, and I go back here, and I go back here, you can see that there's a command that says build with Docker build. Now, I don't need to run this command that basically tells me to build with Docker build, since I've already built my Docker application with compose. The next thing I then need to do is I'm going to go to this number 3. I'm going to take this here. I'm then going to say Docker tag this. So I'm going to paste this here, and this is going to work. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to then go to number 4 and push, and that'll be Ctrl+Shift+V. So what this is going to do is, this is the last command. It's basically going to take my Docker container and push it to ECR here. So by the time we're done, we're going to see an update here telling us an image has been pushed. So let's just go back, and we're going to wait for this to complete. And once it's done, we're then going to move. We're basically going to move forward. That's what we're going to do. So let's just wait. Okay, my image is done being pushed to ECR. So if I go back to ECR and I refresh this, as you can see, we then have our we basically have our service here. We basically have our image here. It's been pushed already. So now let's get into the process of having to deploy it. So to deploy, let's go to deploy. We're going to go to ECS, which is the Elastic Container Service. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create what we call a task definition. So to create a task definition, I'm going to have to move here. Then I'll create a new task definition here, and create a new task definition here. And good. So I'm going to name the task definition Fast Blogger. And then I'm going to be using Fargate. So I would also need to specify the resource I want to use. I think 1 CPU is enough. with 3 gig memory. I'm going to specify the task role as ECS task execution role. Then the next thing I then need to do is I'll need to specify the name of my container. So my container should be fast. Sorry. My container should be fast blogger. So I'll need to paste in the image URI. So to paste the image URI, I'll just go back here and I guess that's loading. Okay, private registry. I think I have that in my private registry or repositories rather. So as you can see, fast blogger is here. I'll copy this and paste this here and good. So now the next thing we need to do is I want to specify my container port. So my container port is going to be 8080 because I mean if you go back here, you can see that FastAPI application is running on port 8080. So if we wanted it to run on port 8000, we could have just specified 8000 here, but I'm using the port mapping specified in my Docker Compose, and the file, I'm basically the port I'm exposing in my Docker file. So 8080 is a good port, and that's gonna work just fine. Then as for my resource allocation, I don't need to touch this. As for the environmental variables, one thing you need to do is this. We can decide to add an environmental variable like rpnv here. So I can decide to specify rpnv to prod here, rather than just specify this here. So I can take this out and the default will still be dev. But if I specify it here, it's basically going to be used as my app environment. But since I've specified my rpnv in my Docker file, I necessarily do not need to specify it anymore here. So now the next thing I need to go to is on the logs. I don't need to do anything on the logs. On the storage, I don't have anything to do. And I think we're pretty much good. So the next thing I'm going to do is just create my task definition. So why this has been created, okay, it has been created. The next thing I need to do is I need to create a cluster. So I can create a cluster. So a cluster is basically contains a group of tasks and services that will be run. So my application is going to run as a service inside this cluster. So I can then decide to do something like, I'll call this prod cluster. I'm going to call this prod cluster. And for infrastructure, I'm going to call this AWS Fargate serverless. I'm going to leave this here. For monitoring, I don't need to do much when it comes to monitoring. So I'm just going to create my cluster. So creating this cluster might take a little bit of time because this is something that's been done in CloudFormation. So I'm just going to wait for this to be complete and we can move forward. All right, guys, my cluster has already been created. So, okay, I think it's nice if I can just go full screen. Okay, good. So yeah, full screen works quite well. So I'm going to go to my Pro cluster now, and it's going to show me the list of services and tasks that are running. So I want to create a new service here. So, and this service is going to be my application. So for my compute option, I'm going to use the capacity provided strategy, which is kind of like the basic ones here. So I'm also going to need to specify my capacity for provider, whether Fargate or Fargate Sport, but we want to keep things simple. So we're going to basically use the default options AWS is giving us. Then I'll need to specify my task definition. So I'm going to specify my task definition, which is fast blogger. Then I'll need to specify it to use the latest revision. Then I can call my service. Okay, the name of my service name can be fast. Okay, I can call this fast PG service. So that works. So service type replica. So this kind of helps us to replicate service that is running multiple times. Now deployment options, I'm not necessarily going to be deploying. So in deployment options, we're gonna go to deployment options later on. So, but that'll be in the next video. So there's also service connect and discovery. There's also networking options. So I'm gonna go to my networking, and for my security group, I'm going to use I'm going to use container SG, not DBSG. So this is basically a security group that allows my connection to basically accept incoming traffic from anywhere, and basically also make send requests to anywhere. So this container is going to work quite fine. So with this settings, I think we're pretty much good. So the last thing I'm then going to do is I'm going to create this service then. So once I create the service, it's going to be created in CloudFormation. So it's possible this might take a little bit of time. So I'm just going to pause the video, and once this is done, we're going to continue. Okay, guys, we are back. So now it seems that our FastBG service has been deployed successfully. So if I go here, you can see that my service is active. So I'm just going to click on this service here. And then I can decide to go to task here. Okay, we have this here. So as you can see, you can kind of like see the task that are running under my service. So I can click on this task. Then I'm gonna see the public IP here. So what I need to do is I need to open the address. As you can see, it cannot be reached. So that's because I need to specify my port, which is 8080. And once I do that, as you can see, detail not found. So I'm just gonna say /docs. Good. So this act has basically successfully deployed my FastAPI applications. So to test things, just to ensure that things are working quite fine, I'm going to try to create a new user, because one way to create a new user is basically try to create a new user kind of like it makes a database request. So since this makes a database request, I kind of want to tell if things work as they should. So I'm going to execute this. And yes, as you can see, the user has been created, which kind of means that the connection to our database worked in production and our application is successfully running in production. So if you're still doubting, let's just go back to pgadmin. So on this fast blogger here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to right click, I'm going to refresh, then I'm going to go on the schemas, and okay, that seems to be taking a long while to load. Okay, I could say I could go on the schemas and try to see everything that's been done in my database, but since that's taking a long while now, I might not be able to kind of like do that. But one of the tests we can kind of do is we can just decide to log in. Since we created a user called string with a password of string, let's just try this out. I'm just going to execute this, and as you can see, we have a token for our user. So this is more like a full proof that our application works. So if we go back to RDS here, it should be okay. Is this done? Okay, since it's not working, if we go back to RDS, we should be able to see that we should be able to see the connections being made to our database. So FastDB. Okay, so as you can see, we kind of have 4.74%. And if we go on the monitoring, sorry, let me just go full screen. Okay, as you can see, CloudWatch basically has 30 new events it's recognized in the last 3 hours. So this kind of like gives us so as you can see, we can see that our CPU usage went up at one point. I think this should be the point at which we made a database request, or we can decide to go further by checking our logs and our events to kind of see. So as you can see, we're already having logs as we make requests. So I thank you guys for joining me throughout this video, and I really hope we had a great time trying to see how we can Dockerize our FastAPI application and also deploy our FastAPI application to ECS. So in the next video, I'm going to be doing some things that are kind of CI/CD focused. So this time around, I'm going to be moving it forward, and I'm going to be showing you the industrial practice of automating your deployment with CI/CD. So we're going to be using code pipeline, or should I say code build and code deploy, to kind of like automate your deployment to ECS, or rather ECR. So Thank you for joining me in this video. I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Cheers.